arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. I just want to begin by thanking all those people who have organised this lovely little celebration for me. Yes. The organising committee, Aya and Richard and Dea and Mark and Sarah, and all those people really who've made lovely donations to buy this statue that will go back the back of the pond there, and to fund my little trip to Japan. And I was relieved to see that I could get a return ticket. Also, I thank Charles and Heather and Mark and Peter who've done this very professional recording for us. And of course, everybody who's chipped in for today. So we have other birthdays here. Sarah, it's her birthday, and also Andy, who's got the 5-0. Yes, we're all suffering. And I think we can bring to mind Stephen Hawking. We can feel a certain sorrow for David Bowie, didn't quite make his 70. And we can I think we can all join in with a special regard and good wishes to Kim Jong-un in Korea. I am delighted that you've taken such joy in my own little birthday. But of course I myself am depressed. Yes, this is the beginning of the steep, the downward trend to decrepitude and senility. Now there was a card which some thought was telling me that 70 was the new 30. It's not. 70 is serious. Okay. So, something peculiar has happened to me this year, in the sense that suddenly, I suppose it's reaching the end of all this building stuff here too, and feeling very settled outside Saripanya. Now, the sort of memories of my past life came up. I mean, this one. No, this one. And of my past living. And you know, I just wondered how it is that I got to this place. So I thought it was an opportunity really to answer the questions that I'm often asked, but I usually palm off with a sentence or two. You know, as to how I became a Buddhist, how I became a monk, and why do I continue? So to start at the beginning there, you see, my father was in the RAF, and they were following the armies up the tour of Italy when he was billeted on my mother's house, and they fell in love. And it seems as though he took AWOL in order to marry her. And when he got back to Cyprus, they put him in jail for a while. It's all very romantic. Anyway, he brought her to Britain, and that's when her real depression began. If you can imagine moving from a hillside village overlooking the Adriatic with the smell of pine in your nostrils and ending up in Manchester. Black Manchester. We forget how black the cities were, saturated with soot everywhere and pea soup fog. Anyway, she happily became pregnant with me, but decided to go home to have me. And when the time came, they brought in the local midwife. She was 25, so presumably there was a little difficulty. But either they rushed it or it was her particular way of doing things, but they cut her. Such was the agony, she bit into my uncle's thumb, and he showed me the scar. Even then I wouldn't come out. They had to prise me out with forceps. I mean, what a start. What a start. She went on to give birth to 2 more sons and a daughter. So I've got 2 brothers and a lovely sister. The effect of birth upon us. Consider the Buddha. So as soon as he was born, his mother died. So there must be a feeling there of loss, whether the baby's fully aware of it or not. There must be a feeling of loss. And according to certain disciplines like rebirthing, you know, that breathing thing, and Stan Groff, I wasn't going to say hologrammic or whatever it is, breathing. The birth trauma has a real effect upon us. You know, it's there within our psyche. So I know this from the difference between my siblings, because my mother said that my sister, who was last, 11 years on, fell out. And she's utterly phlegmatic. Nothing like me. So, that was my birth. Now, I want you to imagine this little 5-year-old boy being taken to church by his father. And he's walking into church. The church is quite big. It's St. Patrick's. It belongs to a 3rd generation of Irish. And as you walk in, your nostrils are suffused with incense, frankincense. The atmosphere is very warm. And the people are very quiet. And they're just sitting there. And you're taken up into the gallery, into the choir loft. And your father is conducting. And at the point where the priest in these wonderful garments comes in with all the altar boys, because it was high mass, you're there as a little boy, a little child, and you're let loose. You can wander around, and you're hanging on to the barrier of the choir, overlooking down into the congregation, and suddenly Bach or Handel or sweet music is coming. So this was my introduction into devotion. I was in ecstasy. Yeah? And it's something that I think a lot of children these days don't get. Not that they don't get it with other things like pop stars and things like that. But it was my introduction into religion as a real heart-based experience. And this was to carry on. So that was, I call, if my first catastrophe was birth, this was my first blessing. And my mother being a Southern Catholic, they were Roman Catholics, so I should have mentioned that. My mother being a Southern European Catholic, it was all about the love of Jesus, you see. And my father was all hell and brimstone, and yeah, I had a nice balance. I obviously warmed towards my mother. Northern Catholicism is very Protestant. So when you convert to a religion, when you actually move into a religion, you move in for various reasons. Most people who come to Buddhism come because they're suffering, because things have gone wrong, and they've heard about meditation and stuff like that. But to actually begin to develop a heart attachment, a good attachment, this isn't, not all attachments are evil, a sort of relationship of the heart with your religion is very difficult, because this is done when you're a child. When you go to Thailand, you'll see little children are brought into the monastery, into the temples, and they bow, and they also have this sandalwood and incense, and they have the chanting. So that's that sense of devotion, which is a beautiful emotional state. It's a mental state of praise, of being in a lovely spaced out place. It's absolutely glorious. And of course you can develop these things into absorptions. That's very difficult for us, because it's a different culture. We haven't got that sort of background. So I always think the way into that, the way into a devotional, a sort of heart connection with the Buddhist teaching, is through gratitude. And the more that you consider what the teaching has done for you and for others, etc., then you get this gratitude come up. And it's very simple to go from gratitude towards love, towards a relationship. Now, of course, the Buddha is gone. I mean, it's not as though we're relating to the Buddha. What we're relating to is an image within us of the Buddha. And in growing that, in a sense, we're actually forming a devotional relationship to the Buddha within us that we want to become. See? So it's the Buddha as he appears in daily life. It's not the transcendent Buddha. It's the Buddha of compassion, of love, of joy. And that's why I've got all these statues. Okay? That's the idea of devotion. I'm trying to squeeze a bit of Dharma out of my autobiography, okay? So anyway, we moved then to North Manchester, which was all fields at that time, out of dingy Moston into the lovely fields. The fields didn't stay fields long, they were soon built on, and right at the back of us they established a cemetery. So we're at school, there were over 50 kids in the class, right? So 47 was the peak of the baby boom. It begins in 45 and ends in 65. And if you look at the graph, it goes zoop on 47 and then begins to slowly come down. Yeah? So Theresa May is a boomer. So then, while I was at primary school, a priest turned up. And he gave us this wonderful talk with pictures about the missions. He showed us pictures of Flores, which is a beautiful island in Indonesia. He showed us pictures about New Guinea, and he showed us pictures about South America. And he talked about the wonderful things that priests did out there, missionaries. And if anybody felt like they might be drawn to that sort of thing, then they should get in contact. So anyway, I got the 11 plus, and I went to Xaverian College, which was a grammar school. But two of my friends from that school went to St. Richard's College. And during that year, for some reason, it came to me that that's what I wanted to do. My mother was fiercely against it. But my father was like that, but it was my Aunt Rose who really wanted a priest in the family. Come the age of 12, I am off on the train down to St. Richard's College. And for me, it was entering into 2 years of undiluted heaven. Because it was all about doing exactly what you want to do. And that's when you're most happiest, isn't it? When you're doing exactly what you want to do, in an unpressured situation, you're in perfect joy. Correct? For instance, a hobby, right? So the routine there was up about 6:30, 7 o'clock. We went down for Mass. After Mass, we went out in most weathers, only in the most severe, to do the old army exercise. Hup, choo, hup, choo, hup. Back into breakfast, clean up. School starts 9 o'clock, all the way through to 5 o'clock. And all that time, apart from a little break at lunch, as I remember, it was in silence. Can you imagine that for a 12-year-old these days? Yeah? And at 6 o'clock, we went into study, and at 8 o'clock, we were finally let free and we could play games down in the big game room. Imagine a 12-year-old doing that today. Huh? And I really got into it. I mean, it was, all I remember is just being blissed out and hating going home, and having to come back because it was just there that I found my joy. Then something began to happen which promised a different sort of joy. It promised gold, but it turned into glitter. And the joy it promised finally ended up with frustration. Puberty. Even Mick Jagger could get no satisfaction. And he tried. Anyway, we were let out every so often to go for a walk on a Sunday. And there were about 6 of us, 5 of us on the trip. And as we got down, we suddenly had this idea that we'd smoke. Now, teenagers are by nature rebellious. The order didn't smoke. And it was a German order begun by a German priest, and it was mainly German and American. And the joke was, we don't smoke, so we drink. SVD, okay? And so it was a sort of little rebellion to go and get some cigarettes. And we decided to steal them. There was an old lady who ran a shop at this bridge on the Worcester Canal. And as we entered in, we'd had it all figured out. Somebody distracted her and somebody took the cigarettes. And I can't remember what my job was. And I daren't. So I'll leave that. Well, we smoked, of course. And that when we got back in the evening after lunch, we were all called to the prefect's office, one headmaster prefect. And he told us that, he asked us, had we taken cigarettes from this lady? And we all said yes. She was no fool. We were probably the only customers the whole day. There's nobody out in the middle of nowhere. So we were dismissed, and we thought, well, that's it, you know. There was no corporal punishment in this seminary at all. If I was at Zavarian, you'd have been beaten. Anyway, about a day or so later, we were all called for a talk in this big classroom, and the rector, who was in charge of the whole place, announced that certain boys had stolen, and he called our names and he said, "You are expelled." Can you imagine that? I was 3 months off my GCEs and they kicked me out. Anyway, I got back, and because of that, my GCEs went all over the place. I had about 4 GCEs. I had to take my English again. And unfortunately, because the education was mainly by Americans, who I don't think really understood the English GCE system at the time. So what happened was, I ended up with subjects that I had virtually no interest in: Latin, French, and history. I had a bit of interest in history. And so life went on, and I didn't do well at the GCEs. And I remember talking to my father about this. Now, when they expelled, when I was thrown out, that was a cut-off of a vocation. This vocation to be a priest remained in me as a really strong, tremendous urge for 3 years till I was over 19. Why couldn't I go back? Why couldn't I go back? It's because they never forgave me. I can't tell you how important it is to forgive your enemies. What happened was, come the GCE, I turned up and they gave me a room in an outer building. I had to go into the exam room at a different entrance from everybody else. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody, and they weren't allowed to talk to me. In other words, I was excommunicated. And there was no way you can come back on that. See? If a priest or somebody come up and said, look, give it a couple of years and then, you can join another order, I'd have had an in. But I had this block, I couldn't move. So if you have any pity on your enemies, on all of them, do forgive them, because it allows them to forgive themselves. And of course, in our offering forgiveness, we empty our own hearts of, the revenge and the hurt and all that sort of stuff. Now, it doesn't mean to say that you've got to have somebody's forgiveness in order to forgive yourself, but it just makes it much easier. Okay? So I went on then to about 19, and my father pointed out to me that since I was lost, I hadn't a clue what to do with my life at this point, right? I'm completely lost. He said, why don't you teach? He said, you can travel with teaching. So he must have known I was, unsettled. So I decided, I didn't get into university, so I went down to St. Mary's College, which was then a Catholic training college. It's now a university. And it was the year they were introducing the B.Ed. And instead of doing the B.Ed, I did the other offering, which was a degree course and a teacher training course. And it was during this time that I completely forgot about being a priest. I finally began to enjoy a bit of life. But there's this underlying meaninglessness, there's this underlying boredom that comes because nothing you're doing is of any direct meaning to your own heart. And so what you overlay it with is distraction. You know, you get drunk, you chase women, you do all sorts of daft things. And that went on for a little while until... and it was during that time I fell in love. Oh my goodness. Well, you know what the first time is, you see. So I'm completely sozzled, right? And on one steamy, love-drenched night, she fell pregnant. This was my third catastrophe. So now in a Catholic community, for that to happen is a horror story. The abortion law had just been introduced, so it was legal. Which let's not confuse legal with moral, just because in a liberal society, many of our personal decisions are left to us. But I just couldn't go there. It just wasn't on my to-do list, getting married and having children. So we struggled with it. We both struggled with it. She would have been, I think, happy going that way. And eventually I had to be true to my own heart. And I went up to visit the parents and I said, look, I can't marry. I said, but I'll support them. It was a sort of way of getting myself into that position where eventually I'd sort of marry. It was a sort of an in-between place which I felt sort of happy with, that I wasn't entrapped, and then finally I'd probably give in. But to the family, it just wasn't a no-go, and they just saw disaster for her daughter. They had connections with surgeons and stuff, and so she had an abortion. I never felt really bad personally about that because I was never brought into that decision making. And of course I'm part of that whole process. But if you go on the website and just type in something like reactions to abortion, you'll see pages after pages of men and women who really regret, no matter what good reason they had, actually regret that whole process. So it's there, shall we say, within my psyche that at some part of my life there was an abuse of my sexual powers, even though it was a very wonderful moment. And Buddhism is no different from other religions. As soon as there's conception, there's consciousness. So there's a living being. There's no way out of that. Okay? That's what's understood anyway. And this further, I think what this did to me was it further alienated me. It further alienated me from my own heart. It further put me into a position of what you might call an underlying despair, which I never really looked at. It was just there underneath it. The boredom, the meaninglessness, and then this tragedy and all that just lay down upon me as a sort of despair, which every occasion would actually land me in a sort of angry depression. But it never lasted long because I'm very sanguine. And then one day, I was 21, 1968, very important date, 1968. That was the student revolutions, if you remember, in Paris and all that. And I lay in bed on a Sunday and I said to myself, I wonder what will happen if I don't go to church. Now in those days, if you didn't go to church, it was a mortal sin. And if you didn't get to confess to a priest and you died, you went to hell forever. I mean, that was the teaching. So it was a big decision. Right? They changed all that in the mid-60s with Pope John the 23rd. And I said to myself, if I don't go to church today, what will happen? Let's see what happens. Nothing happened. So I never went again. I know, it's the most ridiculous thing to, I do it well. And what it manifests really was that the religion had now lost that connection of devotion. It had just become an empty ritual. I was just turning up for the Mass, receiving communion, etc., etc. And it had lost its potency. And I think also there might have been guilt about the abortion and all that sort of stuff. And so there was a cut-off there. Now what this did, of course, was it deepened my alienation. It deepened my alienation to the whole thing. In other words, I found myself where Nietzsche found himself. I only discovered Nietzsche fairly recently because sort of God is dead, we've killed him. And Nietzsche struggled with that. I mean, he came up with the answer of a sort of the courage to face the sufferings and the death of life and to sort of somehow rise above it. And that's what he meant by the Superman or Supraman, the Übermensch. The Buddha himself, if you remember, had that sort of existential crisis. I mean, he puts it in the myth. There's a myth surrounding, seeing a sick person, an aging person, and a corpse, and this person sitting under a tree. And the whole thing is about him in his young 20s coming to realise that actually what he's heading towards is sickness, aging, and death, and that this image of the samana, of the recluse sitting under a tree, suggested some sort of an escape. So we have to, I think, imagine the Buddha that he himself is going through an existential crisis, and it's so strong within him to find the answer to this that he leaves his family. In his case, his just born child. So there's this. So I think from our point of view, this is where the Buddha's at. He really doesn't. The meaningfulness of life has gone. It's an existential angst, right? And that's where I was really with this existential angst. Now I don't really give you the impression that I was going around moping and all that. No, I was still getting drunk and having a good time. It's just that every so often in silent moments, just by yourself, you suddenly sink into this area of just sheer boredom, a sort of a despair about life, and that you're just living it. And then came my third blessing. We went to see Waiting for Godot by Beckett. Now some of you probably don't know that play because it's years old now. But it's basically about two tramps who are having these gorgeous conversations waiting for Godot. Godot's going to come and sort it all out. And the same thing happens in the second act. And in the first act, two people come, walk across the stage. They don't go into too detail. But when in the second act, one's gone blind and the other one's gone dumb. And in the first act, there are leaves on the tree. In the second act, there's no leaves. So here are the two tramps waiting for Godot, and everything's just getting worse. I came out of that play, even though it was just an amateur production by a college, absolutely enthused. I couldn't stop talking about it. They all thought I'd gone mad. But to me, it just caught this whole existential problem of what is the point if in the end you just die. And I thought at this point, just to get across this, I'd read out a poem by Beckett, which I came across much later. I spent a lot of time writing about nothingness, well, doggerel anyway, and like what it meant to just come to the end, to just finish, and that's it, you're gone, is it? So let me just read this little poem to you, see what you think. Just think, if all this, one day, all this, one day, one fine day, just think, if one day, one fine day, all this stopped. Get it? So that was the underlying existential problem, right? That I was sort of battling with. In terms of my emotional life, when I wasn't sort of being extrovert and going out there, there's a lovely poem by Gerald Manley Hopkins that gets it across, and I carried this now for a long time, but it gives you an idea of. I think it's just a wonderful piece of poetry. I wake and feel the fell of dark, not day. What hours, what black hours we have spent this night. what sights, heart, you saw, ways you went, and more must in longer life's delay. With witness I speak this, but where I say hours, I mean years, I mean life. My lament is cries countless, cries like dead letters sent to dearest him that lives, alas, away. I am gall, I'm heartburn, God's most deep decree, bitter would have me taste. My taste was me. Bones built in me, flesh filled, blood brimmed the curse. Self-yeast of spirit, a dull dough sours. I see the lost are like this, and their scourge to be as I am mine, their sweating selves, but worse. Ooh, isn't that good, eh? Whew, their sweating selves. I love it. So then, actually, I've gone and forgotten my centerpiece. I'm so sorry. I'll have to go back to my birth. Do you mind? I'm sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. After that terrible birth, we seem to have both recovered. Eh? I hadn't seen this picture for years. And when I saw it, I thought, well, blow me down. See? And two things came to mind when I saw it. I thought, first of all, we remember our mothers as old, you know, in old age. We forget they were all lovely young women. Yeah? And the other thing was that little child. If it was just shown to me, there's no way I'd make a connection with that child at all. Yeah. I mean, this is the 10th body. Hair. Maybe. Well, no, he's got hair. He's got hair. He's got hair. There's no way I'd made a connection. This is my 10th body, if we're to believe biology. Every 10 years, you completely change all the atoms in your body. Anyway, sorry about that. I'll leave it here. So, okay. So I leave. The relationship breaks up. I can't handle it anymore. So anyway, I'm in Spain and I'm looking for my friends, and I've lost them. I've arrived there sometime later, and I pick up a telegram from the local post office. Do you remember telegrams? Yeah, fantastic. Eh? You get down for the telegram, and it said, "Congratulations, son, BA and teaching certificate." And I went up onto a high rock and overlooked the sea, and I said to myself, "There's no way in this world I want to teach." So I went down and camped in this camp. And that night there was a torrential rain. I woke up with the tent around me, completely sodden with sand and everything. Staggered to the drink area, the what do you call it? Is where people drink and stuff like that. And looking pretty miserable for myself. And I met this bloke called Dave, and we began talking. And by the end of the evening, we decided to travel together across the world. Simple as that. See? So I came back and I got a job through somebody I knew as a rep for selling audio visuals to schools. And there was lots of money in education, so I made lots of money. And I was travelling all over Cornwall and all over Wales selling this stuff to schools. And I gathered something like £1,000, which must be, what? It's a lot of money these days, isn't it? £1,000. And come the year, off we went. And during that time, remember, all this time I've got this thing going on, this nothingness and this stuff in the heart. But because of the joy of travel, just the constant new information coming in and the liveliness of it, it was all sort of underneath. It would only come up in the gloomier moments. See? So anyway, we went off and we started off towards North Africa. We went down to, saw all the stuff in Egypt, the usual stuff, ride a camel and all that. Went over to Khartoum, lay on the luggage rack to sleep and woke up with sand everywhere because of a sandstorm. Got onto a boat down to Juba, which is now the capital of South Sudan, and for 10 days we were looking at the amazing sight of reeds. The reeds were so tall they went up above the boat, and the boat just ploughed through this canal, which was the Nile, and all you saw for 10 days was reeds. And because we didn't have much money, we were just eating bread. So this was a really gloomy time, and that's when I wrote most of my doggerel about nothingness. Yeah. We got down to Juba, we flew across to Entebbe, we made this amazing bus ride across Africa. I slept on the back seat, and every so often I was in mid-air as he ran over an elephant, which was unbelievable. Got to Mombasa, stayed with his brother, but we didn't get on so well. So we went up the beach and camped up there, and there we got stolen. All our travelling checks were stolen, which was fantastic because when you got to India, you got on the black market and made a lot of money. Terrible, isn't it? And they stole my father's watch. He'd given me this gold watch that he had been given after he'd finished his time as a headmaster at St. Patrick's. And it had inscribed on it at the back, and it was a precious thing, and I lost it. So I wrote him a letter expressing my sense of sorrow and my love of him and all that, you see. Well, when his reply came back, about 3 or 4 months later, he said, "Thank you, son, bit sentimental." So we get to India. So we get this cattle boat across the ocean, across the Indian Sea from Mombasa to Bombay, playing chess all the time. Lots of travellers, by the way. There wasn't many going down Egypt, but by the time we got to Africa, the boat was full of Westerners. It was all hippies. Yeah, I was dressed in purple. So we take this boat all the way across to Bombay, and we do the usual trip. And we finally ended up in Nepal, and that's when we got really stoned. Up in Nepal, lots of these stones full of dope. And there were these lovely hippie sort of gatherings where we'd all sit in a circle with a chillum. That's really ridiculous, isn't it? And so and that lasted for a while. And then we made our way down to Calcutta, and Calcutta was at war. That was the Indo-Pakistan war where Bangladesh split off. And so there was no planes going out or anything. So we stuck there for 2 weeks. And what I did every day. So this was one of my big awakenings. When you went to India, this time it wasn't so bad. But in those days, sickness, destitution was in your face. It was in your face. And in Calcutta, they have a huge park with this massive statue of Queen Victoria, which I presume they got rid of now. And there was a massive road, circular road going around. That road was packed tight with the sick. Elephantitis, everything, apart from lepers, all the way around. And they were lying on the pavement. And when you saw that, you understood Mother Teresa's compassion, because many of them would have died just there. So anyway, I saw that. That sort of thing I'm not used to. I'm not ready to receive. I'm aware of the suffering, but I'm not ready to receive it. Every day I went to this Sikh restaurant to get curry, and I would always ask for a glass of water. And when they brought the glass of water, which was a pint glass, you'd always leave a nice oily thumbprint on the side, on the inside. I don't know how it was that I was in India for so long and never caught anything. It's just weird. Every day I passed this woman who had a huge goiter. And she sat there absolutely silent, holding a little thing for coins, and her eyes were always glazed with tears. Right? She just sat there, never looked at me, just sat there. And as I passed on the other side of the road, I always saw her. Day after day I passed that poor woman, and I never gave her a penny. So then I'm coming round a corner. I'm just wandering around Calcutta, and I come round a corner, and right before me there's this little girl. She must be over 7, but she looks round about 5. And she's sucking a dried black banana peel. And she sees me, and as she sees me, she has the dignity and that destitution to cover her sex. And that hit me so hard that I just bombed past her. I never went back to buy her a banana. It just hit me so hard. That was my little boy drowned on the beach moment, you know, where you suddenly, the awareness of compassion is not enough. There has to be that contact.